Hi there, I'm Doran Ellenveld Dotan in Sfat, and though I've been struggling with myself mightily about how to formulate and deliver this video, or even how to approach it, I did promise I'd make it, and I'm going to do my best to give over some information which I promise you will cause some geological disturbances above and beyond what is already happening, but it has to happen. My video recommended Videos Explain Ancient Consciousness Engineering that I made a week and a half-ish ago has garnered 1,191 views, which for my videos is the New York City bestseller list, New York Times bestseller list, which is pretty good because I don't sell anything. It's gotten 89 likes, which is 100% of the responses. In order to understand what I'm going to be speaking about herein, it would be necessary to watch that video and look at the videos to which I linked in the description box below that video as background. The hero of our story is Samuel Noah Kramer, the Sumerologist, probably the most eminent Sumerologist in history. God chose him very, very specifically to do the work that he did. He was obviously cherry-picked, and what he discovered about how the Sumerians were using language and mathematics to engineer consciousness is probably the most important information we need to know about our reality. And I'll read a little bit to you about who he was so that it will become immediately clear how singularly capable he was of immediately understanding how that information impacted on Judaism and subsequently, of course, on Christianity and Islam, and even beyond, because there are other religions that were also using some form of these languages that were being promulgated. Although the Assyrians themselves spoke in their own language, the system that they set up for engineering consciousness with language and mathematics, using that mathematics for architecture, is critical for understanding everything in culture subsequently. So let's look a little bit at Professor Kramer's background in order to understand who he was and what he surely understood. I will be discussing a passage from the Babylonian Talmud, from Tractate Sanhedrin, I'm sure that Professor Kramer was familiar with that, and with his discovery he immediately understood the connection. Shmuel Noach Kramer, Samuel Noah Kramer, was born in 1897 near Uman. Everything connects. In 1905, as a result of the anti-Semitic pogroms by mobs following the October Manifesto should immediately connect with October 7th and what happened here. The October Manifesto of Emperor Nicholas II of Russia. His family emigrated to Philadelphia, where his father established a Hebrew school. So these were Jews who knew Hebrew well enough to be able to teach it. It transpires that later he did teach at Gratz College, and the time of his tenure overlaps with that of Ze'ev Chomsky, better known as William Chomsky, who is Noam Chomsky's father. William Chomsky was a Hebrew linguist, and I have every reason to believe that Professor Kramer shared his information with Professor Chomsky, and the two of them became very much aware of how all this impacts on Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. Shmuel Noah Kramer began teaching in his father's school. This means that he knew Hebrew well enough to be able to teach it as well. These were people who, of course, back in the old country, would have had a classical Jewish education, which includes the Talmud. There is no doubt in my mind that Kramer immediately understood the connection between how Babylon was engineering consciousness and the fact that rabbis who had been exiled to Babylon, right? Babel, of course, is an etymon of Babylon, and chose to remain there, were involved in this engineering of consciousness as well. In the world of Sumer, Kramer writes, "Finally, it came to me that I might well go back to my beginnings and try to utilize the Hebrew learning on which I had spent so much of my youth and relate it in some way to an academic future." So his starting point is that which he has learned in Hebrew and in Jewish studies. His legacy, according to an AI overview, is he is credited with spreading awareness of the Sumerians and their crucial role in the development of civilization. According to the AI overview, Samuel Noah Kramer was a leading Assyriologist and world-known expert in Sumerian history and language, who dedicated his life to deciphering and publishing Sumerian texts. Legacy: he is credited with spreading awareness of the Sumerians and their crucial role in the development of civilization. Now, Samuel Noah Kramer, this is also AI overview. Samuel Noah Kramer attended Drop C College, which has been absorbed now into the University of Pennsylvania. He enrolled there at the age of 29, initially to study Egyptology. However, a falling out with his professor led him to leave the college. He then transferred to the University of Pennsylvania, where he pursued graduate studies in Oriental Studies, specializing in Mesopotamian languages, and ultimately earned his PhD in 1929. Kramer did not graduate from Drop C College. What we learn from this is, and the nature of this difference of opinion that he had with one of his professors is not described, but we do know that Kramer learned from this experience that if you have a falling out with one of your higher ups in the academic hierarchy, you are going to be outed. It will be you that leaves. You're not going to convince someone else of what they will not be convinced of. This tells me that when he began to understand how this tradition of consciousness engineering, which was very much a part of Babylon, it was passed down. They developed what was an organic system that even when empires rose and fell, the system continued. He must have immediately understood the implications of that for the rabbis who were sitting in Babylon and establishing yeshivas, schools of learning, Jewish learning, in Babylon, and preferring to remain there rather than coming back to Israel. Okay. And now we can get to the heart of this issue, which is what is written in the Babylonian Talmud. Anything that's written in the Babylonian Talmud is accepted as unquestionable by all Orthodox Jews. I'm going to read it to you in English translation so that people who don't speak Hebrew or Aramaic will understand it. Another reason why I'm reading it in English translation is because the Hebrew-ish with intermixed Aramaic is on such a low level that it is almost incomprehensible. One wonders whether or not their grasp of Hebrew was so poor that they couldn't construct a sentence that could be understood in some kind of a solid way, or whether or not they were deliberately being ambiguous. I choose option B. The Hebrew is so bad that the average student in the state of Israel today in high school writes better Hebrew than this, and their Hebrew is nothing to write home about. What I'm going to read to you is attributed to Mar Zutra. Mar Zutra is not mentioned until later as being the head of the yeshiva in Pumbedita, so there might be some doubt about whether or not he was actually the head of the yeshiva. but he is among the scholars of one of the most central Babylonian yeshivas. He writes the following. Mar Zutra says, and some attribute it to Mar Ukva. I'll show you who both Mar Zutra and who Mar Ukva were, so this will become clear. Mar Zutra says, and some say it was Mar Ukva who says, now listen very, very carefully. Initially, the Torah was given to the Jewish people in Hebrew script, the original form of the written language, and the sacred tongue, Hebrew. It was given to them again in the days of Ezra in the Assyrian script and the Aramaic tongue. The Jewish people selected the Assyrian script and the sacred tongue for the Torah scroll and left the Hebrew script and the Aramaic tongue for the commoners. Commoners is not really the best translation. Hediotot are the simpletons, the scholarly unwashed. It is asked who is being referred to, the answer to which is the Samaritans, who by the way, to this day, still use the original Hebrew script. What I just read to you was not only a shocking lie, but to my mind, most devastating blow to Judaism ever launched. To say that the Torah was originally given in the Hebrew script and in the Hebrew language, but that it was given again in the time of Ezra after the Jews returned from the Babylonian exile, or some of them did, not all did, and that Aramaic is now on par with Hebrew, is absolutely beyond belief. This is being written by someone whose own Hebrew is so bad that he can't even do simple agreement between noun and adjective, which every 2-year-old Israeli kid can do. It is either a complete ignorance of or a deliberate sabotaging of the oral law. Why? The oral law in Hebrew is derived from Hebrew grammar and syntax and the values of the Hebrew letters when writing Hebrew. So the written Torah are the letters that are written on the klaf, on the animal skin on which a Torah scroll is written. The oral law, the true oral law, is based on Hebrew laws of grammar, the syntax of composing sentences, and the numerical values of the letters. Today, when people teach the pseudo-Kabbalah, they teach about the letters. They do not teach about the Hebrew grammar and syntax, most of whom do not even know Hebrew grammar and syntax. And they do not talk about how that is actually the basis, not only of the mystical tradition, but of Jewish law, because the rabbis undermine that. In Hebrew, and this relates to what the Babylonians did about building consciousness into their structures, into their constructions. Hebrew does the same thing, but it does so in a holy way. Hebrew came to break up the stone hard, set in stone, dried clay, fired in a kiln writing of the other languages that were engineering and engineering consciousness, as well as building cities, by introducing a language, the letters of which have substitution values, and that gives them infinite flexibility so that your mind does not get set in stone. This is what God revealed to Avraham in Okey, which was one of the centers of Babylonian mind engineering, as well as a major center at that time. This is Avraham's gift from God and gift to the world. The Hebrew language which allows consciousness not to get set in stone. The rabbis intentionally undid that by going back to Okey. These yeshivas were very close to Ur. They were in the Babylonian Empire. They flew in the face of the covenant that God made with Avraham and made a mockery of it. In Hebrew, the grammatical structures of roots, when they become verbs, there are different structures of the verbs. They are called binyanim, which means constructions, buildings. The form of which each different kind of verb takes, the way it's structured, is called a tavnit. A tavnit is a tray that you would make a mold in. It's like it's a mold. The different forms of the verbs are called gizrot. Gizrot are how to cut things, how to measure and cut things. So Hebrew is also all about engineering realities, building worlds. This is what King Solomon's temple precisely was the building of the structure of the world in accordance with God's will. And this is what the rabbis who were kicked out and sent to Babylon rose up and rebelled against. This I am absolutely sure Kramer understood, and he was afraid to say so in so many words, because he would have undermined everything that the Jews took to be reality. And having had a taste of what it's like to go up against the administration, he didn't want that to happen again. So he was very careful not to say in so many words what I'm saying to you in so many words. One of the gifts of the state of Israel is that we can speak much more freely than we ever could, which is very interesting. Now, Mar Zutra, it says the following in Wikipedia about Mar Zutra, who said that Torah was given for a second time in Aramaic and with Assyrian script. Mar Zutra died in 417 of the Christian era. He was a Babylonian rabbi of the 6th generation of the Amoraim. 6th generation. By his time, they're sitting in Babylon for 6 generations. The Hebrew wasn't very good. Now, some people attribute what Mar Zutra said to somebody by the name of Mar Ukva. Who is Mar Ukva? Mar Ukva was an Amorah of Babylon of the 1st generation. He was very strict about refusing any action that could be interpreted as a bribe to him by any one of the parties in a judicial case. Of course, he was the head of the judicial, the rabbinic court. One of the things that is central to rabbinic Judaism is that the generations deteriorate in learning and understanding. So anything that is said by someone in a former generation cannot be contradicted by subsequent generations. So, by attributing what Mar Zutra said to Mar Ukva, what they're saying is, he was 5 generations before, so you certainly can't go up against him, and he was known as someone who was of impeachable character. The very same thing was done when the rabbis instituted pros bool, which they used as a tool to go against the rabbinic, the Torah edict of not lending on interest and allowing people who were in debt to go free on the 7th year. As far as the Yovlot, the Jubilees after the 50th year, the rabbis don't want to know from that at all. They did exactly the same thing. They instituted pros bool, allowing money to be lent on interest and not freeing people from their contracts in the 7th year, and attributed it to Hillel the elder. Exactly the same thing. They attributed it to a rabbi who was known to be of impeachable character from generations before, so that no one could go up against it. So that is Mar Ukva and Mar Zutra. Getting back to Mar Zutra, what do we know about him? His closest colleagues were Rav Ashi and Amemar. The 3 of them are described together in their studies, meals, and, listen up carefully now, their visits to the court of Yazdegerd the First. Who was Yazdegerd the First? Yazdegerd was the Sasanian King of Kings. Does this sound familiar to you, that expression, King of Kings? In Iran from 399 to 420. He succeeded his brother after his brother was assassinated. Yazdegerd was known by his own people as the quote-unquote the sinner. Yazdegerd is known for his friendly relations with the Jews, as well as the Christians of the Church of the East. So Mar Zutra and his buddies are courting Yazdegerd the First. who is a tyrant. He's trying to be enlightened, but he is a tyrant, and they wanted to curry favor with him. So the first thing they do is they say, oh, Aramaic, which was by then the language of the empire, had been for a long time, is now on par with Hebrew, and the Torah was given, God forbid, a second time in Aramaic to Ezra. At the end of his life, Yazdegerd became disenchanted with the Church of the East and wrote some edicts against them because he had they had burned some of the temples, the idolatrous temples, and that was the state religion. So he did go against them in the last few years of his life, but for a long time he kept very good relations with them, so much so that Yazdegerd was appointed the guardian of the Eastern Church's emperor's son. When it seemed that they were in great trouble, they transferred their son to his court to be protected. So what we're seeing is our Zutra, which is very, very interesting. He's the name actually means the master of littleness, which is interesting, is currying favor with this Babylonian king of kings, who used to walk around with a sun and a moon on his crown. Yeah. And they put Aramaic on par with Hebrew as the Hebrew language. That would be today like saying that the Torah was given a second time in English. I guess that there are some people who read the King James Version who actually believe that that's true, but it's not. In the subsequent discussion in Sanhedrin 21b to 22a, I'll link to that in the description box below so that you can see it for yourself. Ezra, it was claimed, was on a level like Moshe Rabbeinu and Moses himself, and he was given permission to give the Hebrew again in Aramaic. This is what the rabbis are claiming. 6th generation Babylonian rabbis. It's to a point where in the Talmud there's a discussion about whether or not Torah scrolls that were written in the original Hebrew script were kosher. They claim that they weren't. I'm going to say that again. The rabbis in Babylon claimed that until the time of Ezra, all of the Torah scrolls that were written in the original Hebrew script weren't kosher. Is there Aramaic in the book of Ezra? The answer is yes. Is any of it Torah learning? The answer is no. Search for yourselves to find an English or a Hebrew, whatever you feel more comfortable reading, translation of the Aramaic from the book of Ezra to see what it says, and you will see that it is a verbatim account of the edict of the Babylonian king. There is nothing of religious instruction or anything that pretends to be a prophecy or a rewriting of Torah, God forbid, in the book of Ezra. The Aramaic is a quotation from that which was written in Aramaic, and so in order to be correct and proper, they do the reporting of what was written in the language in which it was written. But it has nothing to do with Torah. You can see that for yourself. There are some rabbis who claim that the fact that they found Torah scrolls from Qumran, the Dead Sea sect, that were written in the Assyrian script, but God's name was written in the original Hebrew script. I don't even know how they justify this in their minds. They say that's because they are reducing the holiness of it, so that it shouldn't be holy. Not just like coins or regular correspondences. The Torah scroll itself, these rabbis claim, have the name of God in it in the original Hebrew script in order to lower the level of holiness of it. What AI Overview says is exactly the way I have always understood this. Why did the Dead Sea sect write the Hebrew scrolls in Assyrian writing, which was already prevalent in their time, but spell God's name in the original Hebrew script? The AI Overview agrees with what I always saw when I learned the Dead Sea Scrolls, and I saw that the name was written in the old Hebrew script, that it was done out of reverence. Now, I don't consider AI exactly the oracle. It's funny. But it is helpful. And sometimes it's very concise and to the point. What it writes is reverence. This practice, that is the practice of writing the name of 4 letters in the ancient Hebrew script, even while the rest of the Sefer Torah, the Torah scroll, is written in Ashuri, is written in the Assyrian script, is because of reverence. This practice indicates the immense reverence the Qumran community had for the divine name, setting it apart visually from the rest of the text. That is the way I always saw it. I mean, even practically, preparing a Sefer Torah is so much work. Why would anyone do something to a Sefer Torah to intentionally make it less holy? It just doesn't make sense. And we see this a lot, you know, when you get through the air of authority and seriousness that the rabbis put on, what you find is they're very often just talking absolute nonsense. Why would somebody make a Sefer Torah with all of the work that's involved in it, and then write the name of 4 letters, the holiest name in the book, in letters to make it not kosher? What? Okay. To my mind, even more astounding than the rabbis putting forth the idea that Ezra changed the Torah and made it into Assyrian with Aramaic. Assyrian script with Aramaic language. More stunning than that and more heretical to my mind is the fact that the rabbis say that Torah was given originally in the Assyrian script. And that is a result of the Jews sinning. They lost the ability to be able to read the Assyrian script, and they started writing in the Hebrew script. And only after they became righteous people, after they came out of Babylon, they regained, according to the rabbi, the stature of being able to get the Torah back in the Assyrian script. I'm really hard-pressed to imagine another example of fawning on kings and trying to, using their position as the heads of the community, to try to subject the Jews cognitively to the foreign kings and to the lingua franca of this area at that time, which was Aramaic. That this was a program instituted to make the Jews forget Hebrew and think that Aramaic was not only on par, but that the Aramaic with Hebrew, that the Aramaic language together with the Assyrian script was holier than Hebrew and the Hebrew script. It's just absolute heresy. It is beyond belief. I'm reading now from the Hebrew, so it'll take me a minute just to translate. It says here that the Aramaic script even served as a basis for writings in India and in the Middle East, and that it even, and being the lingua franca that it was, and the official language of the Babylonian Empire, that it also affected the writings, the holy writings of Hinduism and Islam, and even influenced, of course, Christianity and Buddhism, being as it was the lingua franca of this area. The rabbis wanted then, and still want, the Jews to be incapable of attaining God consciousness by learning Torah correctly in Hebrew. While the official language of the state of Israel is Hebrew, the Hebrew that anyone who works in any kind of a government institution or body has to use is incorrect Hebrew, spelled incorrectly, punctuated incorrectly. And that means that all of the schools have to teach the children in correct Hebrew. The addition of a letter instead of a vowel sound in Hebrew changes the value of the word. And so people reading Israeli Hebrew, which is based, by the way, on Mishnaic Hebrew, I see the same errors in the Mishnah, changes the value such that they are not able to dive deeply into the numerical structure, the numerical underpinnings of the engineering of worlds of peace and justice and holiness. So they do learn Hebrew, but they learn Hebrew as though it were a secular language. And among the ultra-Orthodox, there are some that forbid Hebrew being used. Women are not taught Hebrew. They learn the pseudo-Kabbalah, which is written in medieval Aramaic and then translated in many cases, because there are a lot of Jews today that don't learn Aramaic very well either. So then they translate it into incorrect Hebrew. And so you have layer upon layer of blockage so as not to be able to get deeply into the Hebrew and attain a God consciousness in it. There's a whole lot more that can be said about this. This is really worthy of people doing very, very, very serious research in this and fixing it, because something terrible has been done to the Jews by systematically removing them from the holiness of Hebrew, making them think that Aramaic is on par with Hebrew. Then they make up all kinds of things about the Sitra Achra, you know, like the other side, and how you should use Hebrew in these cases and Aramaic in those cases. The incorrect learning, and this is the absolute horror of the thing, the incorrect learning of they who rebelled against the judges, the prophets, the holy kings in the house of David. That is the correct tradition of interpretation of Torah in Hebrew, brought Babylon into being. Unknowingly. By this time they were so far removed from God consciousness that they did not know that they were creating their own subjugation. They became subjugated to the evil kings and empires that they themselves brought into being, which is the worst stage of idol worship. It's pretty easy to convince someone that the ceramic figurine that they made in their workshop really isn't God. You know, you just drop it on the floor and it breaks and everybody can see. That obviously can't be it. Far, far more difficult to make someone understand that the king with the sun and the moon on his crown and in the middle of his forehead, that they are fawning in front of and trying to curry his favor, is actually the work not of their hands but of their mind, of their consciousness, which is no longer under their control because they don't have the Hebrew skills to be able to get their consciousness under control. So they are serving, they are carrying out the dictates of that which they brought into being without knowing it. That's the lowest level of idolatry. And it persists to this day. Every time an Israeli official meets with the head of some government, whoever it might be, capitulates to the demands of this head of state, that head of state, this is precisely what's happening. That government official is so far away from Torah reality that he or she doesn't even know that they're bringing this person into being, and then it's talking to them, their own subconscious is talking to them in the form of an outside figure and telling them what to do. This is insanity. You know, that's schizophrenia. The rabbis very intentionally crippled the Jewish people, hid the ways of returning to God and to the Holy Land in peace from them, and that is persisting. That is persisting to this day. I don't expect, as a result of making this video, that everybody's going to see the light and go, "Wow, yeah, you know, let's start learning Hebrew." But if I reach a few people who understand the importance of learning Hebrew correctly, I think it's important to know Ktav Dots. I think it's important to be able to read it. I don't think that that's as central as really actually knowing the Hebrew letters, the Hebrew language, and the Hebrew letters in Ashuri. The Assyrian letters also have the final forms, and that's also very, very important for doing the calculations correctly. Obviously, the prophets knew that if certain letters came at the end of the word, that their values were changed. But with the Assyrian writing, we actually have different forms of the letters Mansapach. The letters Kaf, Mem, Nun, Pe, and Sadi have final forms and different values. To learn Hebrew grammar correctly, to learn Hebrew syntax correctly, to learn the values of the letters to the point where one is automatically calculating while they're reading, to be able to do both at one time, such that they can perceive various terms in various ways. This is what I would request of people to do if they want to live truly as Jews, because I must say that rabbinical Judaism and its two ugly daughters, Christianity and Islam, are heresy that just bring hell on earth. And if somebody wishes to live in a version of earth that is heaven, the way to do it is to get back to learning Hebrew correctly. And then one can see what Shlomo HaMelech, what King Solomon is actually saying in his writings and what his Hebrew is actually affecting. Thank you for listening. This is a tough one. I battled with myself fiercely to do this. I'm going to add an anecdote before I end, because there's a little time on the card. All of this is very personal to Danielle and myself. When we left kibbutz, Danielle said that he wanted to go to America. I did not want to go to America, but I also didn't want to be the one that, like, years later he would say to me, I could have been this, that, and the other thing in America, but you didn't want to go with me. So I said, okay, let him experience America for himself. And we went to Philadelphia. The reason why we went to Philadelphia was because, first of all, New York was too big and too heavy for me already. After 5 years of being in Israel, I couldn't handle going back to New York anymore. But I did want to be in a city, and Philadelphia specifically has institutions of Jewish learning. Dropsy College became part of the University of Pennsylvania. It became Dropsy University after being a college, then it was absorbed into a school of higher Jewish learning in the University of Pennsylvania. There's a beautiful, or there was, Jewish library in Philadelphia, and there was Gratz College, wherein Ze'ev Chomsky taught, and Kramer taught. My husband had already read at least one book by Kramer. And he was actually hired by Gratz College to teach there, to teach Hebrew. And it was while I was in Philadelphia that I had an experience where I heard God say to me in Hebrew, I've given you the key. Hareini noten lach et ha'mafteach. And I didn't know what mafteach was being talked about. What happened was I became ill with pneumonia, and all the king's horses and all the king's men couldn't put my lungs back together again, and my husband said to me, we've got to go back to Israel. Even though I've been hired to work, we've got to go back to Israel. You can't breathe because you can't breathe because your soul is in the Holy Land. And we went back, and as soon as I got back, I went to the doctor the next day, or 2 days later after arriving. I went into the health clinic, and they checked me, and they said, pneumonia? You don't have pneumonia. There was no sign of pneumonia in my lungs at all. And it was shortly after that that I began to learn the substitution values. Well, it just came to me in a flash one night in the middle of the night that very much resembles a near-death experience, except I knew that I hadn't died. I just saw this light coming at me and suddenly started seeing the letters changing in front of me. And then Hashem taught me how to change all of the letters into one letter and then be able to distinguish them from that and then do the substitution values. And I didn't know that anybody else had been doing that. I didn't know about a Rav Abu Lafi at the time. And now, with this information about Kramer, it all makes sense. Even though I was living in the Holy Land, the work that Kramer had done was so important, so seminal, so central to the Jewish people being able to break out of the mindset of Babylon, which is precisely what God revealed to Avraham. That I had to go back to where they were in order to physically touch them. When my husband went for the job interview at Gratz College, he walked into the same building where Shmuel Noach Kramer and Ze'ev Chomsky taught. And then I had to go back to Israel with that. And as I say, began to understand the substitution values. And I see now that our work, Danielle and my work is a direct continuation of the analysis of the Hebrew language that Ze'ev Chomsky undertook, and the understanding of how Babylon engineered civilization and how to break out of that mold. Thank you for listening.